In this video, we will be tasting and talking about batch 71 of the Ecochateas Tea Club, Hong Oolong Tea. Batch 71 of the Ecochateas Tea Club is a Hong Oolong tea made by our source of small leaf black tea as well as our traditional Dong Ding Oolong tea. And in recent years, we've had chats about Hong Oolong and its presence on the market and the production methods. Hong Oolong is a type of tea that was designed by the Tea Research and Extension Station, part of the Department of Agriculture here in Taiwan, specifically for a tea growing region that is relatively small and unknown on the southeast coast of Taiwan in Taidong County. That area originally grew tea and attempted to make baozhong cha in the fashion of Wenshan baozhong in northern Taiwan. But it turns out the climate conditions couldn't really compete with the quality that was being produced already in northern Taiwan. And they tried high mountain tea style, a lightly oxidized unroasted tea. Same thing, it was tea and it was decent, but it wasn't what you can get at probably a better price even, it was difficult for them to find a cost-effective niche in the market. So the Tea Research and Extension Station stepped up and developed this processing method, which is basically a hybridization of oolong tea making and black tea making. There are variations of the mixture of those two, depending on who you ask. It seems to vary quite a bit. Some are very close to black tea production. Some are integrating more of the oolong tea processing methods. Our friend is a traditional oolong tea maker with a lot of experience, and he has inherited his trade from his father and grandfather. He has a small family factory where he processes his neighbor's tea regularly. So he not only processes his own batches of tea, but he's processing tea for people in his community continuously. So in that sense, he's very experienced, more so than most, actually. So with a little bit of encouragement on our part, we decided to take a part of his I guess it was July harvest from his family plot of Qingxin Oolong tea, a kind of an heirloom plot of tea. It was planted at least 30 years ago. So I say heirloom, it may not fit the actual definition of that term, but tea that was planted more than 30 years ago, in our experience, is a different variety than tea that has been planted in the last 10 years, even though it's called the same thing and technically is the same thing. Strains evolve, and anyway, that's a deeper, more scientific topic that we're not actually qualified to talk about. It's really just coming from our experience of observing plantations of different ages. So here we have it, a summer crop of tea that he would normally make either into black tea or traditionally made oolong, like we purchase from him and offer on a regular basis, traditional Dong Ding Oolong tea. And we got to see what he did. So he used his family-style traditional factory that only has machinery for oolong tea making, and meaning that it does not have the flat roller that is used for black tea. But it does have what they call a half moon roller. It's a concave shape, and it's used in the processing of oolong tea. So that's what he used for his making of this batch of Hong Oolong, which is his first. And we were really just excited to be there and watch it, and then have been very pleased with the results. So he made it in the style of a traditionally fashioned oolong tea, meaning that it was heavily oxidized, heavily manipulated, a lot of solar withering, a lot of wilting and jiaoban, or tumbling and shuffling. And the leaves looked quite, like the highest degree of oxidation that you see in oolong tea making, even in Lugu. He is from Phoenix Village in Lugu Township, the heart of traditional Dong Ding Oolong tea. So he made it like he would make a batch of traditional oolong, and then before the kill green stage, or the tumble heating stage that kills the naturally occurring enzymes in the leaves responsible for oxidation, he rolled the leaves in his half moon roller to tear them slightly, a fraction of the amount that black tea would be rolled and torn. So he rolled it twice, and then he did do the tumble heating to cease oxidation, to inhibit it from further oxidizing on its way to black tea. The results are a tea that looks more, well, depending on if you're going to roast a traditional Dong Ding Oolong, it's fairly reddish and not completely the color that a black tea, a fully oxidized tea would be, but not far away. It's similar to what we purchased from him in his produce of small leaf black tea, which is also integrating oolong tea processing methods, but the small leaf black tea is rolled to the extent of full oxidation. This maybe is 60 or 70%. It's always really a ballpark guess. Don't trust people that say like 67%. There's no real measurement of that, okay? There's no scientific calculation of how much these leaves have been oxidized, but it's a relative scale, so to speak. All right, enough about tea making. Let's go into tea tasting. I brewed 13 plus grams of tea in this 200 milliliter pot in a general Gong Fu style, about 1 minute per brew. I have the first brew, second, third, fourth, and the fifth brew here in the pitcher, which I let sit for at least 3 minutes, probably about 5. And this is the combination of the first 4 brews. When I really want to get to know the composition of a tea, I like to brew it and maybe have some of it while it's hot and freshly brewed, but definitely keep some of it until it cools down to close to room temperature. The first brew is getting close to room temperature. Let's see what we've got. It really is what it says. It's a Hong Oolong. Hong meaning red. In Chinese, black tea is called red tea, based on the brewed tea color. And it's a combination of the qualities of both oolong and black tea. I find it to be a little bit closer to a heavily oxidized oolong. It has a dry finish to it that offers a kind of fresh bouquet, or just a more complex and interesting finish than most black teas would offer. It's fruity, more of a preserved fruit maybe. When I was brewing it, it smelled a lot like stewed apricots. Okay, and so I think the fruitiness would be closer to a stone fruit, plums, apricots. Maybe cherries, but more of that kind of a plum or apricot pluot, perhaps. And preserved or cooked. It's definitely got a ripened, really kind of a sweet character to it. But the dry finish that is classic of an oolong tea is really what makes this tea more interesting. While having some of the flavor profile of a black tea, it's definitely got an oolong character. And that's what we were shooting for. So my friend Mr. Chen was satisfied with his flagship batch of Hong Oolong tea. He already has ideas of tweaking the methods a little bit in the future, bringing it closer to a more traditionally processed oolong tea, and we'll be very interested to follow that evolution. Okay, let's go to the second brew. I think I really hit it this time. It's this type of tea. I find that brewing it less or more in terms of the amount of tea leaves, the concentration, can really affect the profile that you get. If you brew it too concentrated, it'll give you a substantial brew, of course, but you lose the complexity. But you want it to be strong enough to have a full-bodied character. And this one's tasting just about right. Third brew. Something extra in there. What would that be? Sometimes food just doesn't really hit it when you're trying to nail a flavor note. Definitely a dry finish, but that's the classic oolong character, and that's what gives it a complexity, especially in the aftertaste. Holding out, getting a little bit thinner on the fourth brew. Fruity, slightly sweet, dry finish. It's complex, but it's an interesting complexity that has a black tea character, but just more floral, or I should just say more aromatic. It's hard to say if it's floral or not. I'm going to go for the fifth brew that sat for several minutes. Before I do that, I'm going to have a sip of the combos. Tangy. It's got a tangy character. Plums. I think it's closest to plums, even though the aromatic oils that were coming off the brewed tea as I brewed it reminded me of apricots. I'm getting more of a plum flavor. It's much more substantial having sat for several minutes, but it's not overly astringent. It's dry just like all the other brews were, but probably about the same degree of slightly flatter, having sat for several minutes and being at the end of a brew. I'd say this tea has less brewing stamina or endurance than a traditionally made oolong. 5 brews in this fashion will be satisfactory, probably not more than 7. So it's a little bit, I guess because the leaves have been torn a bit, more exposed, some of that substance that gets locked into a leaf that maintains its integrity has more brewing endurance. I'm going to quickly take out the brewed leaves from the pot. Just to demonstrate, in our sourcing blog, you can see photos of the tea as it was being processed and see how the effect of the rolling, what the effect of the rolling was. So these leaves, the rolled leaves they can't be rolled as tightly as a normal oolong because they've been torn. So they don't maintain that integrity that allows them to be rolled very well. But it's a pretty tea. It looks more like a traditional oolong, very much a semi-spherical rather than a spherical shape. Uniform coloration. So it's mostly, it looks like a highly oxidized tea, but there is still green in some of the leaves. Some of the leaves haven't been torn. So that is the spectrum that's representing visually the spectrum of oolong going into black. There are leaves that look more like an oolong, and then there are leaves that look more like a black tea. There you have it, batch 71 of the Ecochateas Tea Club, Hong Oolong, from the heart of traditionally made oolong tea country in Phoenix Village, Lugu Township, Taiwan. We think it's it was an interesting event to accompany our friend in the making of this, and it's an interesting tea made by an oolong tea maker pushing his boundaries a little bit in his processing methods. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next month.